Hi, I'm Shaun Whiteside, and I'd like to read for Translators Aloud a passage that I translated from a novel by the Swiss writer Linus Reichlin. It's called Señor Herrera's Blossoming Intuition, published by Kiepenheuer and Fitch. It's a very funny book about a novelist who goes on a retreat at a monastery in the hills of Andalusia to finish a thriller that he's been writing. When he gets to the monastery, he meets the chef, a terrible chef, each meal more disastrous than the last one, Señor Herrera, who is very intrigued by what he's doing and persistently gets the wrong end of the stick. Reality and fiction become catastrophically intertwined, and things get quite dark. This is a passage from near the beginning of the book. Linus Reichlin, Señor Herrera's Blossoming Intuition. "They stop at sunset!" the taxi driver shouted. He heaved my suitcase out of the boot and set it down on the dusty courtyard of the monastery. "That's how it is in the countryside," he said. "Cicadas all day. You can't hear a word you're saying." "Sometimes that's not a bad thing," I shouted. "When thousands of cicadas set your eardrums vibrating and imitate the sound of a circular saw, at least not every word has to be weighed." "They should have filmed this monastery in Game of Thrones," the taxi driver said. "It must be 100 years old." 1,000, I said. He said, "Yes, you can see that. It needs renovating. But the church has no money left. It used to be rich, but now it's bringing priests in from Morocco because they're cheaper." We were standing by the monastery wall, which had sunk into the ground beneath its own weight over time and developed a bulge. Some of the battlements were still in place. The buildings with the Romanesque window arches lurked behind them so that they were protected if they were fired on. The concerns of the 10th century were still on display here. A low, deep archway for the small people and small horses of those times ended in a door made of thick, cracked wood, its planks held together with rusty iron nails. I took a quick photograph of the monastery and sent it to Liliana with a text message. Take a look at this. It's prettier than in the photograph on the internet. They've understated it out of Christian modesty. P.S. The tracker works." I watched the cloud of dust as the taxi driver headed back in the direction of Malaga. I wanted to be let in now. I wanted to have a shower. They mentioned a shower on the internet. Guest rooms with modern shower and ensuite toilet. I couldn't find either a bell or a lion's head knocker on the monastery gate. How on earth did you get in? The cicadas were starting to get on my nerves after all. The noise was an outrage perpetrated by nature. I called the contact number for guest administration that I'd stored on my phone before setting off. No answer. I awarded -points to the guest administrator. I already had a more critical view of the monastery too. It was romantic, no question, but precisely because it was dilapidated. Nobody seemed to care about the painted lead glass windows that were set into the semicircular window arches with spider's web cracks in places, and a tower with an indecipherable coat of arms protruded from the wall like a rotten tooth. I sat down on my suitcase and called Liliana. She said, "Well, how's my hermit? Looks lovely, your monastery. What's the food like?" "Is that the noise of a building site? Are they doing some building work?" I said, "No, it's the cicadas, but they'll stop in 2 hours' time, as soon as the sun goes down." "Liliana? Can you hear me?" "Liliana!" I shouted. Suddenly I felt the weight of a hand on my shoulder. A man had put it there. He said, "Don't try to be louder than the cicadas, it'll get you nowhere. You have to be quieter than they are, like me. You can hear that. I'm speaking quietly, and yet you can hear me very distinctly." He introduced himself, Juan Carlos Herrera, cook and guest administrator. "Liliana," I said, "I've got to go. The cook and guest administrator is here. I love you," and hung up. The guest administrator's face looked familiar. He said, "Yes, I know. I look like Fernandel, the French actor. A lot of older people say that." "People who aren't quite so old, like me, say it too," I said. "I saw the films about Don Camillo and Pepone when I was little. Fernandel played Don Camillo." "I'll have to see the films one day," Señor Herrera said. "By the time I was little, they stopped showing them." He really did look very like Fernandel, the wiry black hair, the peasant face, thick set, exactly the sort of face you want to see if your car breaks down at night and you need someone to help. Señor Herrera carried my suitcase along the monastery wall from which another, lower wall branched off. Through the narrow gate in this one, we entered a garden with lemon trees and an old well turned with a crank. The garden led to a cloister. The Ionic columns, some of them supported by steel rods, were original, as Señor Herrera put it. I ran my hand over one of the columns, which had become greasy over the centuries from all the hands like mine that had inevitably wanted to touch them. The cloister led to a secular annex of bare concrete, added on lovelessly in more recent times, with iron reinforcing rods sticking out of the flat roof. The guest wing. Señor Herrera shoved the plywood door open with his foot and set my suitcase down by the bed. It was a room you didn't want to look at too closely. The only window was practically walled shut, since the cloister wall was right in front of it. The window opens inward, Herrera said, and showed me how it opened inward. All windows open inwards, I said, but this one couldn't open outwards because the wall's so close. You're quite right, Herrera said. You like the room. I said, how many nuns actually live in the monastery? I would say 4, he said. I always cook for 4 if there are no guests, so it must be 4. Unless the abbess gets 2 portions, no idea. Shouldn't you know, I asked, after all, you live here with the sisters? He laughed. It's a Trappist monastery, he said. I don't live with the sisters, I work in the kitchen, and the sisters live in the monastery. There's no contact. I'm not Jesus. They talk to him, but even the Pope wouldn't get a word out of them. They don't even speak to each other. They've taken a vow of silence. No, I've no contact with them. I deal with the professional side of things, paying the wages. The whole organisation with the office in Madrid, I understand, I said. The office talks to you. Yes. Madrid talks to me, Herrera said. The brothers in Madrid aren't Trappists. They're relaxed Cistercians. Relaxed, I said. Among the Cistercians there are some who live according to relaxed rules, Herrera said, and some of the strict observance, as they call it. The Trappists here in Santa Maria de Bonval are of the strict observance. I would even say very strict observance. They're actually hermits. Does that mean I can't participate in monastery life, I asked, in shared meals, in regular prayers? Herrera said, didn't you read the small print? It's on the website. It says, food and accommodation, not eating and chatting and sitting around in the kitchen with Cistercian nuns of the strict observance. No, I said, it didn't say that. It said, experience the authentic monastery atmosphere. Participate in monastery life. This is the monastery atmosphere, Herrera said, pointing at the narrow bed, the small table, the even smaller chair, and, by way of compensation, the very large crucifix over the bed. You are in a monastery, or at least near a monastery, and if you want to take part in monastery life, then don't say another word for 3 weeks starting now. Do me that favour. Instead of complaining to me as soon as you've got here. Dinner's in an hour, served in the garden. You get the same as the nuns, except with fish. Is that all right for you? He left, and I thought, he's right, it's my fault. I should have taken a closer look. I never look closely enough the rubbish hotels I've ended up in because I was too lazy to look at pictures of the rooms. Now I'm stuck in a monastery with hermit nuns. How was I supposed to do research into monastery life if I wasn't allowed to set foot in the monastery? That had been one of the 2 aims of my journey. First, to research monastery life. Second, to find out why my peaceful life stressed me out just as much as a life under constant time pressure would have done. As regards my research, it was about Lena Seidel, the character I had spent months thinking about in connection with the concept for my new novel. She was forced to hide in a monastery disguised as a nun. I'd come here to learn how she lived in the monastery, and now the monastery was closed to me because I hadn't spotted the bit about strict observance. On the other hand, vow of silence, wasn't that a good idea? Lena Seidel has to hide, far from Germany, in Spain, but she speaks no Spanish. In any monastery other than a Trappist one, she would immediately be unmasked as a foreigner. But here, among nuns that not even the Pope would be able to get a word out of, she's safe. Very good. Wonderful coincidence. True, the problem of not being able to research monastery life from inside persisted, but the idea of using the vow of silence to remain unnoticed as a foreigner was entirely worth it. So I was in the right place, thanks to my failure to read the small print on the monastery website. When it came to making productive mistakes, I could rely on myself completely. Thank you.